space that can come out. And we were just talking about that. You were saying that,
Yep.
You've almost been looking for a space where you can share that because you don't do a lot of press.
I don't. It's seasons for it. Obviously, when you have a project coming out or something you need to promote, it's a part of that news cycle. But for me personally, I try to, kind of say to myself a little bit and very cautious of how you want people to get to know you, when you have opportunities to speak and share things about yourself, and not kind of, be a part of sometimes other people's agenda, So that's but been a big fan of yours for a long time and the work that you've done and you are currently doing, and felt like this was a good time to to get out and talk and share some things about me. I guess it's been a journey. It's been a journey. So this is a nice little check-in point, I think.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I appreciate the trust, and I love that check-in point because it must be fascinating to look back at something and then think about where you were in life, what was going on in your mind. So I wanted to start with, there was this one thing you said in an interview, and we were talking about this earlier, this idea of written versus being able to explain.
Correct.
And there was this great point you made that I think people wouldn't recognize with the amount of success you've had, the hits you've had. I think people want to know about you and learn about you. But you said, when you come from where I come from and everybody doesn't get those breaks, that luck, you start to question, why am I successful in life? Why did I go this way and everybody went that way? And I just thought that was, again, extremely humble and also representative of where you grew up, how you came up. Like, which way did everyone go and where did that luck begin for you?
I think coming up in Newark, New Jersey, coming up in that environment and, having, when you're younger, you're living life, you're taking it a day at a time. You're going to basketball practice, you're going to school, you're going to church, you're for me, it was, taking a lot of trips to New York City, going on auditions at a really, really young age and just figuring out what that is. Having parents pretty aware, and very present in my life, growing up. That was rare amongst my family and amongst my friend group, having both parents that was there and very present and aware of my environment as well. Being told to look out for these things and make good choices, to be disciplined, to be focused on things, get your schoolwork, all the positives in growing up in an environment like that. And, hats off to my parents and to sacrifice so much to make sure their kids, were safe and grew up in that environment. It ain't easy making ends meet, grew up very poor, but didn't feel like it. You know what I'm saying? It was very, I think they did a good job at hiding those things. I think as we get older, we look back, it was like, oh man, we went through that. Oh, that's why we slept in the kitchen that one time with the oven open. Or that's when we stayed at grandma's house for like, a couple of weeks when, so you get that reflection of how we kind of grew up. And I think for me, always having a bigger purpose, I think, or just, just that optimism, that I was a big dreamer as a kid. And I think, you start to, not just to focus on just the work of it all, but since I was working such a young age, that's the thing that I can kind of point to of, booking auditions and getting this job and traveling to this place and experiencing these things and coming back home with these experiences and not having a lot of people who could relate or could, I could soundboard off of. And I think in feeling like that, you don't want to alienate those people, and I think, and this is all, I guess, in hindsight, you don't share these stories as much, maybe you should, because you don't want somebody to feel like inadequate or, not being able to have that experience that you might have had. And I think, that snowballs as you get older and from stepping stone to stepping stone as I continue to be successful at a young age. You start to question, why am I being so successful? And the people that look just like me that are right next to me in these everyday things aren't necessarily doing that or not choosing to, just didn't have those options that were laid out to them. And I think you start to doubt yourself for whatever reason or feel guilty for the things that you may or may not have. Even though, my parents were people of service, block parties or, cooking church dinners or, whenever, my house was the house that everybody came to at some point, whether we were going to get pizza that night or dad was going to take everybody camping or going to these things. Like that was kind of my house within my neighborhood and community. And So I think for me, being a person of service kind of, because, it kind of comes from how I was raised, and those are the examples that I knew growing up. I always felt lucky too. As you become more successful and you see less people look like you that are being successful in this realm, and you end up being the one guy that looks like me that's successful, or the couple guys that, or the usual suspects that you see in the audition room, or and things of that nature. You start to sometimes question why are you. Now I feel as though it was my path. It was my purpose, and spirituality, and growing up in a household that was very focused on church and spiritual and meditation, and just being aware of the world that we live in. I felt I was destined for something, not
Wow.
knowing what that was, but just something.
Wow. Yeah. And I mean, when I'm hearing that, it sounds like, I love what you said. You were like, they hid we were poor and we didn't even see that. But this idea of like, you sound so, when I see you talk about your family, and for those of you who are watching, you can see it on Mike's face, but there's so much joy and there's bliss and there's like a happiness when you're looking back on that time. Like I can see it's a positive experience because of how you feel you've been loved and cared for and supported, even though the resources may not have been there or the access or opportunities. And I was wondering, when I was listening to you, like, is there a memory or an experience from your childhood that you think defines who you are today? Like, was there a memory or a story that you have in your mind of an experience you went through that you think brings out maybe that service element or brings out that purposeful element?
And I think this bliss and this appreciation for how I grew up comes in hindsight. The first time you have a moment where you're like, pick up the phone, one morning, you just call your mom and be like, thank you. I get it. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for being that kid at some point, and I'm so sorry for not understanding. I totally get what you guys are going through. Sheesh. I love you guys, like you have those moments when you get older, that you just can't really have that perspective when you were a kid. And I think, I was very mischievous, as well. And I think there were moments when my dad disciplined me, for whatever whatever I did at that time. And then my mom would have a conversation with me around the why. And then being also forced or pushed and nudged into a space where you had to acknowledge your siblings also, in that situation, and the importance of family and what that means. My parents have different upbringings, you know what I'm saying, from, and different family structures growing up. But one thing they've always provided us with is just a sense of like family over everything, and how important that is. And that just kind of kept the groundedness to me throughout. So I think just the experiences of just family.
I like your point about hindsight. I've definitely made that call to my mom, for
Right?
sure. Like, yeah, I've made that call to my mom. And we were around the same age. So for me, it's like, I've made that call. And I think I made it probably like 25, maybe 26.
Okay,
it was probably
okay.
around then when I finally made that call. And not that I didn't love my mom before that. Of course I did. But it was like that honest understanding of just how hard it was to do what she did. Because she was raising two kids. She was dropping us to school, picking us up. She was the breadwinner of the family. She made us breakfast, lunch, and dinner fresh every day. Like, and you don't recognize that as a kid. You don't realize the sacrifice, the hustle, and always making you feel loved on top of doing all of that. It's hard work. You said that now you feel like you've got to a place that it's your path. What was that switch for you that went from like, I don't deserve this, God, like I feel out of place, I'm lucky, to being like, no, actually now I see it as this was meant to be my path? Because I think a lot of people and a lot of our listeners will be there. Like a lot of people are like, they're making moves and maybe they're the first person in their family to go to college, or maybe they're the first person who started up a business and is an entrepreneur, or maybe one of our listeners is trying to break generational trauma and they're the first person to spot it.
Yes.
But then they all live in that space of like, can I do this? Like, am I the one to do this? And so what was it that made that switch from like, I'm not sure I'm the guy, but oh, it is my path?
It's the sum of all things leading up into that point. I think it's all the doubt. It's the imposter syndrome. It's the blessings that you can't really accept fully. And you listen to other people speak who are successful, or you see examples that you kind of feel connected to, like, man, that kind of feels like me, or what he just said or what she just said, I resonate with that. I feel like that sometimes, other people who are looking at you saying, no, Mike, this is what you have. This is what you can be. This is what you are. Nah, that can't. No, that's too good. No, that ain't me. Your own presence in a situation where you have to step back and look at yourself and be like, am I this guy right now? Like, oh man, there's a room full of people who showed up because of something I'm doing, and they're in service or in support of my idea, my thing. Okay. That looks and feels like I'm the guy. Okay. I'm in the industry where, the success of your work and your art has been, dictated and validated by other people's opinions. And whether those opinions are factual or projected on you from their own individual perspective, I think it was a combination of all those things. And I've always been curious and walked towards how do I make myself better? What are the things that I need, the tools that I need in order to improve myself, the way I think, how do I maximize myself, So from, I think, getting an executive coach, who talks to executives all day and how to create healthy conversations, the right type of conversations to have as you're building a team around you. Because, as you know, it's not just us. We have an entire team of people that surround us that help us achieve our dreams and get the big idea done. A spiritual advisor, a spiritual coach that I have who, helps me do my energy work, my spiritual work, and help sift through the noise and find those things. And I think it wasn't until I had, roles that challenged my spirit and myself in a real way that in the weight and where the attention was so loud that it was, it was deafening, and it was, and I couldn't, see clearly. And, these are champagne problems. You know what I'm saying? That we're blessed. So, but the weight is so heavy, and people sometimes think and they see what we have or what, what we're doing, and it's like, oh, just be grateful, or just, what are you complaining about? And most people wouldn't be able to walk, a block in our shoes, with this stuff. And I think it was, and then you have moments where you resent things and you're angry at, the feelings that you accumulate for not being clear or not understanding, why this. There's a lot of whys, and you're not going to get all the answers, but you want to, be able to get to a place where you're clear. So to answer your question, when did I decide? When did I when did I feel like that? Maybe 2 years ago, maybe a year ago. You look at where your family has come from, and shit, look at your bloodline. You look at, your community, you're like, man, there's a cycle there from generation to generation that happens. When you get to yourself, you're like, man, can I stop this? Can I change this? I could do this. Once you know better, you got to almost do better. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I refuse to ignore it. I refuse to see it an opportunity that I had to change things and act like it didn't exist. And I think that was the thing for me, that was like, nah, I gotta, if that's my purpose, if that's my path, is to just see it and I can see the pieces, and if I can just continue to do this, or if I stay down the pathway on that, and I might be able to make a big difference in my nephew's life or my future children's, my future grandchildren's life, I got to do that. Because there's been so many people that it wasn't the perfect storm for them to have that opportunity. It wasn't the right time in the world. Technology wasn't there. The resources, the right social conversations are being had for us to have these platforms and speak and be successful the way we are. you gotta do it. And I think that was a big part of it, understanding my own mortality, and understanding, that, life isn't a forever thing. And I think that happens when you get older too. You know what I'm saying? Like, just turned 37. And it's like, wow, I vividly remember, 15. I vividly remember 21. Vividly remember 25, 30, and I used to look at 35, 37 like ancient, you know what I'm saying? And I'm like, oh man, we're here. And it's like, you got to do what you got to do while you're here and make an impact. You got to fulfill yourself, whatever that may be, And I think so. Yeah. So that moment for me where it was like, okay, I can do this. I can. Maybe a couple of years ago, I think it was like right as I was stepping into directing Creed 3, and the weight of that, and being the captain of the ship the first time, being captain of the ship in a, I've made movies before. I've done that. I know what that's like, but I've never ever been the director. The captain of the ship, and I think that responsibility, that pressure, that, I'm not a dad, but being able, everybody's looking to you for the answer, for the solve, for the leadership. And I think that really thrust me into a mindset of leadership that I'd never quite had the opportunity to do before.
I mean, there's so much in that.
Sorry, I said a lot.
It's a great. Yeah. I like it. I prefer it that way because I'm connecting all the dots as you're speaking, and there's so many things I want to unpack with that. One of the things that really resonated is this idea that you had to challenge yourself. You had to do something out of your comfort zone in order to even recognize that you could become, that you could be, and that you could develop. And often we're waiting to become before we take on the challenge, but it's the challenge that makes us become that person. And I think we resist, even what you said earlier about the opportunities, this idea that if you have opportunity, and there's an Eastern spiritual teaching which talks about if you have opportunities and you don't take them, that's a disservice to humanity
1000%.
Because they're opening up to you without your will sometimes, right? Like there's some of us, and we'll sabotage ourselves because we'll say, oh, well, I didn't ask for that. I didn't know that was for me. And so I love the idea of anyone who's listening or watching what Mike's saying. I love the idea of leaning into that opportunity that is opening up for you. And even if you don't have the skills and you don't have the talent yet, or you don't have all of the tools and the abilities, it's going to force you to develop them.
For sure.
And you talking about the coaching, I want to go back to that and ask you about that because you want to be better mentally, physically, spiritually. It's a big part of who you are. And even the projects you take on, which I want to dive into, that you said roles that challenge your spirit. Even that idea that you're looking at a role not as, oh, what's the next movie to get me the thing? It's like, oh, that's going to challenge my spirit. I wanted to ask, what has been your best habit or tool uniquely that you've developed for your body, your mind, and your spirit individually? What have been things that you've done with your coaches in different areas that you think has brought about new epiphanies, opportunities, and ideas? What have been those tools and hacks that maybe people could lock into as well?
I think there's this woman, Ramona Oliver, that I've known me my entire life. She's my spiritual advisor and coach. And I think starting the day, in meditation, you're taking a moment to clear yourself and prepare yourself for the day. It's so important to step out of your home with intent and intention. A lot of times it's, what are you projecting on a situation to help it manifest instead of negatively thinking about things that can help block your blessings? That's a big thing, So I think, and we all have moments of negativity. That's part of it. It's yin and yang. You're never going to fully get rid of that. But to practice those things in the morning, I think was a big help for me.
Yeah, huge.
You shoot movies and you're doing things, you're walking out, you hear stories of people, but they just can't get a break sometimes. And for whatever reason, it could be from stepping off the curb, twisting the ankle, to, the parking ticket, to the thing, to I just can't get a break. And there's certain people that carry this cloud, and I think some of that can be contributed to the thought process and the thinking and the energy that you're putting into these things. And it's sometimes easier said than done, but to stop and to reframe and to clear yourself and to, no, I'm walking in this light today, and see how much of a difference that can make. And more on the structurally side, this guy Drew Kugler, who no relation to Ryan Coogler, who was an executive coach, and as my ambitions grew from production company to brand marketing consulting companies to just the products and the businesses, the conversations I need to have with the team, and leadership, and the everybody's coming from different backgrounds, and how do you speak everybody's love language? Because everybody, you have to speak differently a little bit to everybody so they can receive it the way you meant it, And I think having the quality of conversations is something that was really helpful for me, meaningful conversations, and giving people the space to hear me and also hold them accountable to the things that I need to hold them accountable for. I think though the combination of the two allowed me to look at situations and opportunities differently, for people to look at me differently. Because it's also a troubling thing when you're walking around as talent for a long time. That's how they see you, and
you have an identity.
I have an identity. That's what so there's these kid gloves that come along with that. You know what I'm saying? It's not everybody's fault. Everybody's in a role. You have to sometimes just step back and look at the thing that we're in. Like we're in an industry, that has generations and generations of taught behavior and practices that any positive disruptor has to understand those things in order to disrupt them in a way.
Absolutely.
And evolve them, and things are evolving. You see it, things are evolving in a way, and if you can look at it in a higher way, I think you can find your way through that.
Yeah, that resonates. You remind me of this beautiful statement from Mark Twain where he said that history never repeats itself, but it always rhymes. And I find like when you were talking about the industry, I was thinking about how if you don't study history, you have the rhyme happening in your life, but then you can't interrupt the pattern. So if you were a young star, which you were, like, I love The Wire as well. I've been a fan of the show. It's like, so you start in this industry early, and then you could spend years trying to figure out why you still have the kid gloves on.
Yeah.
Because you haven't studied that, wait a minute, that's what happens, that unless you disrupt the pattern, present yourself differently, show more of yourself, people are always going to say, he's talent, he's an actor, that's what he does. As opposed to, oh, he's a director, oh, he's an entrepreneur, oh, he's an investor, right? I know you have lots of investments, all again in the health and wellness space, like sports teams, and we're talking about Moss as well. So it's interesting how much, if you don't study the history of our industry, we get locked in the identity of the role we've played in that space forever. And it's so easy for us to get used to feeling, and often we do it to ourselves because it's comfortable playing the same role. And there's a familiar feeling of when I play this role, and I felt that in my own small way, like when I went from having to create content to get my message out there, even though I wanted to do TV or film or whatever and couldn't get a break. And so I went to content. And then I launched a podcast, and I told you about why we launched this podcast earlier. And then I wrote books, and it was like every time it was like, oh, we thought Jay was this, but he's actually, and I've had to go through that. And I've realized the hardest part is you letting go of that identity.
And reinventing yourself.
And allowing yourself, right? Go on.
Definitely. Yeah. Like, have you ever has the podcast been something you've always wanted to do? And this is me just curious, or is it something that you had to you forced yourself to reinvent yourself in a way? Because this isn't it for you.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I know it's not. That this is a stop for you. This is a chapter in your book. Did you ever think I have to reinvent myself, or was that a product of the things that were telling you no, or the things that was challenging?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a mix of them all, but the thing that kind of like supersedes all of them, which I try and tap into, which I think you'll resonate with, because I think that's the conversation we're having, is having a connection with your intuition. Like for me, it's, I'm not looking at like, oh, what's the next trend? Or like, how do I disrupt myself? Because to me, those things are still following other patterns.
Got you.
Whereas it's intuitively going like, what is the thing that I bring, or what do I want to do, or what is the missing piece of the puzzle that I believe I have a unique qualification to fill.
Gotcha.
Because if I'm always looking around, there will always be a million things. Like I always say to people, if you go to a real estate conference, you'll realize you don't invest enough in real estate.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
if you go to a cryptocurrency conference, you'll feel like, oh crap, I didn't do this. And
Yes.
if I sit with a group of actors, I'll be like, oh man, I should have started. Like, you're always gonna feel the deficiency
True.
of the trend that you study.
Correct.
And so if you live that way around, it gets really complicated, because then you're like, well, do I do this or do I do that? Like, whereas when you go inward, it's like, oh, I feel alignment
Yes.
with this right now.
Yes.
Because it lets me express myself. It lets me connect with people in a certain way. I feel I'm at the right evolution in my journey where it can manifest, as opposed to like, oh yeah, let me just figure out what the next big thing is. Which,
Correct.
If that
It makes so much sense, bro. And I think that's what it is like your alignment with where you feel truthful.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes that always doesn't mean you're going to be financially okay.
Totally.
As well, you know, like you can feel spiritually aligned and everything, and mortgages due, you know, rent is due. You feel me? So there's that element of it as well that you have to find your way through. Yeah, that intuition, that North Star is something that has led me